Hi, I'm Valerie, and this is my long overdue November 2019 reading roundup. As you can tell by my gravelly and sultry voice, I've had a bit of a cold for forever at this point. So before things get worse, or before the month goes on any farther, I wanted to make sure that I met this commitment to myself and did my reading roundup for November. So, without further ado, there's about 5 books, I believe. We'll see if that's true. I think it's 5 that I touched on. And a couple of them were really some of the best books I think that I've read all year. So, I wanted to make sure to touch on these. I was very nonfiction heavy this month. I will have descriptions and links to the Goodreads of each one of the books that I talk about. So, first things first. The first book that I read that I loved this month was called Invisible Women: Data Bias in a World Designed for Men. And it's by Criado-Perez. Goodreads at the time of this recording gave this book a 4.46, which I think is pretty dead on. I would say that this book is one of the most important books that I think I've read in a long time, and I personally think it should be required reading in high school for both boys and girls, and we're not going to grandfather other people in. I think everybody should read it, essentially. One of my many quotes that I really enjoyed from the book is just a basic summation. It goes, "Failing to collect data on women and their lives means that we continue to naturalize sex and gender discrimination, while at the same time somehow not seeing any of this as discrimination." And I consider myself to be a feminist. I believe in equality for the genders. And there were many things in the book that simply confirmed things. One that I was already aware of, but many of them gave sort of context for them. They gave facts and figures to back up discrimination and bias that I think I was aware of to some degree. And it certainly brought to light things that I maybe wasn't as aware of. So I don't think for most people it would be surprising to hear that women do most of the caretaking role in the world. The statistic the book gave is that women are responsible for 75% of the unpaid care work worldwide. But there are so many things in addition or combined and added to that data that put it in context. So even if you know that women do most of the unpaid care work, what you might not have considered, what I certainly hadn't considered, was that that unpaid care work is not considered in the gross domestic product of nations, including the United States, where I live. That means that all of that work is not considered in decision-making, in budget allocations, in taxation, etc. And when the government makes decisions and doesn't take that unpaid care work into consideration in their decision making, say they cut public services that we all pay for with our taxes, demand for those services doesn't cease. The work is simply transferred generally to women, with all the attendant negative impacts of female paid labor participation rates and gross domestic product. So in other words, say the state or the federal government sponsors elder care, or say preschool, some sort of nursery school care for children or the elderly, and funding gets cut for that. People still need those resources, and what happens often is that women end up picking up the slack. So if that means that they can't work a full-time job anymore, or they have to adjust and take a lower paid job that maybe has more flexibility with hours, those are the types of situations that are being that just impact everybody on every level, most particularly women, most particularly lower income women, most particularly women of color, or women from underserviced areas. So from small scale to large scale decision, the needs of women are overlooked because women are not included in the data. And if they are, the data is not disaggregated. So time and again, there were instances cited where in really serious circumstances, women are not being considered. Everything from the testing of pharmaceuticals and other medical services, just really shocking and upsetting stuff like car manufacturers and the way safety belts and impact collisions are tested are not treating women as individuals. Men are treated as the default. And even in this day and age, even we're in 2019, women's health is being overlooked because of this. So that means so many things that you just don't think of, from the plowing of snow-covered roads to symptoms for major life-threatening diseases, clinical testing of pharmaceuticals, like I mentioned, the design of technology like cell phones, virtual reality devices, smartwatches, mapping. If you think about it, why doesn't Google supply more data on safe routes instead of just focusing on, is it a toll road? Is it a major road? How about, is it a safe way for people to walk? Like things like that. Voice recognition software. That's something that actually quite recently has come up with me in my job. I do video production and editing, and I've been trying to use some voice recognition software when it comes to apps and programs for teleprompts. And I'm struggling a lot because it's not recognizing my voice. I'm pretty husky at the moment, but normally, as with most women, my voice is higher pitched, and I just have a hard time getting the software to recognize my voice and advance the script. So 51% of the population is being discounted with this. You don't have to be a feminist or even a woman to see the flaw in that, to be discouraged or angry about it. But I'd encourage you, don't just get angry about it, talk about it, strategize ways to be an ally of women, whether or not you're a woman yourself. Think about how you'll support women, particularly minority women, in everything from feeling safe in public spaces. Advocate for positive maternity leave practices in your workplace. Stop using male pronouns to describe both sexes. Don't make men the default in terminology overall. If you have kids, or you're somebody who maybe in this Christmas season or Hanukkah season, holiday season, is buying materials, books or media for kids, make sure you're supplying them with materials that show women represented in the sciences and in professional positions. I was actually just at Target earlier today, and I was in the kids' book section looking for the books that were like stage 1 for young people starting to read. And I was really happy to see that there were books that were showing, I think it was a book about cats, and the cat characters in the book were showing going to the doctor, and the doctor was a female, which I know it sounds like a small thing, but is a good positive thing to see. And I'd encourage you, buy from brands and companies that show diversity in their advertising and have women-friendly, human-friendly labor practices. That was another thing they talked about in the book, how many of the bots or software that are developed to look for resumes and hiring practices by default are looking for or are biased towards male candidates. If you're involved in hiring, if you're a manager, even just lead meetings, make sure women have a seat at the table, that you make that seat accessible. Monitor interruptions of quieter and female voices. Formally allocate a set amount of time to speak. Use unanimous decision making. Don't just go with the loudest voices. Culturally and institutionally, women are oftentimes having quieter voices, being less assertive, just based on which characteristics are prized in women over men, which is to not be as assertive, to be quieter, to emphasize characteristics of warmth and approachability as opposed to decision making and speaking up. So make sure that when you criticize someone, and this is something that I've really taken to heart, if you criticize a person and it's a woman for being bossy or being mean, ask yourself if you'd have the same reaction if that person was a man. She actually just being assertive or just doing what's needed to get the job done. Social power for women is in being seen as warm and caring. As I mentioned, if a woman strays from that, she's often seen as cold and is treated with anger. You could see examples of this in nearly every workplace and at the highest ranks of government, where in Congress and Parliament, women are patronized and shushed. Or if you think in the most recent United States presidential campaign, the word most commonly associated with Hillary Clinton was bitch. Hillary Clinton has a famous quote, "Human rights are women's rights, and women's rights are human rights." The bottom line is safety of women underlies all of this. You've probably heard the famous Margaret Atwood quote before. Men are afraid women will laugh at them. Women are afraid that men will kill them. I read this book as part of a book club, and one of my friends, when we discussed that quote, mentioned Courtney Barnett's song Nameless Faceless, where she sings, "Men are scared that women will laugh at them. I want to walk through the park in the dark. Women are scared that men will kill them. I hold my keys between my fingers." Ask a woman if she hasn't felt that feeling walking alone at night. She doesn't go through life with that thought on her heels in every public situation. And that was a large section of the book as well, talked about just the real insecurity, bodily insecurity that women have in spaces, and why more governments are not considering those as factors when they're designing things like access to public restrooms, safe private public restrooms, or safety for women on public transportation. So again, I'd encourage you, it's easy to get angry and frustrated, but think of how you're going to be an ally in these situations going forward. I checked this book out from the library. I'm going to buy it because I want to support it, and I also am sure I'll want to reference it again. Highly recommend. The second book that I read this month was another really good one that I'd endorse or recommend. It's called The Happiness Advantage by Shawn Achor. The version I have the book has the subtitle, "The 7 Principles of Positive Psychology That Fuel Success and Performance at Work." I actually just recently bought another copy of this book for a friend for Christmas, and I noticed it had a shorter subtitle in that version of the book, but I originally bought this a couple years ago for work, and that's when I originally read it as well. For work, I reread it. I actually used it as the basis of some content for a Learn Share for work. Shawn Achor is the author of this book. At the time that I'm recording this, Goodreads is giving it a 4.17. I would similarly rank it pretty high myself. I really enjoyed reading this again as much as I read it the first time. I think I first was exposed to Shawn Achor through a TED Talk. He's got one of the most all-time, most popular TED Talks. I'll link to it in the description. This is just an awesome book. I'm going to keep it as a reference, and I'm sure I'll revisit it again. Basically, the premise of the book is that, according to studies, only 45% of workers self-report that they're happy at work, which means they aren't experiencing what Shawn describes as the happiness advantage, which is that your brain at positive, optimistic, is tremendously more creative, more kind of every possible scenario, every possible outcome when it comes to business or life is improved when you are acting at positive as opposed to negative, neutral, or stressed. And I believe the statistic they quote is that you are 31% more productive, more intelligent, more creative, and more energetic, which is, who doesn't want to be all of those things? Happiness can even impact your physical health and resilience to disease, with happy employees taking less sick days, having less objective symptoms when exposed to viruses. I guess I should get happier. Maybe that'll work with this. And living longer lives. Shawn posits that at the root of the majority of unhappy workers is the mindset of success first, then happiness. I think we've all kind of had those feelings before where we think, if I could just do, if I could get this promotion or get the job that I want, or maybe reach a fitness goal, or having some sort of accomplishment, then I'm going to be so happy, so positive, whatever. But here's the thing. If you reach that goal, if you get the job or you get the promotion, for most of us, it's likely that there is just another hurdle on the other side of that. So you get the one job, maybe you're okay for a little bit, but then you're looking for the next thing and the next thing and that next thing. You lose 10 pounds, you want to lose 10 more, or whatever it is that your goal was. So in fact, you just keep kind of pushing happiness back on the horizon. And what Shawn talks about is that you want to flip that. If we wait for success to be happy, we're really denying ourselves. We're limiting ourselves. And happiness, as is shown in multiple studies, and I really love about this book, is all the brain science and all the studies that he cites that gives evidence to what he's saying. It's not just a theory that he's positing. He's actually showing you the hard facts and telling you the brain science, why we're wired this way, which is really neat. And it shows that happiness is actually the precursor of success, because happiness and optimism actually fuel performance and achievement. And we can do something about this, because one of the things I was thinking was like, well, that's great for happy people, but what if you're not inherently happy? What if that's not your default setting? And what he really emphasizes is that because of neuroplasticity, that our brain is constantly able to change and grow, we can actually teach ourselves how to be happier, how to be more optimistic, more motivated, more creative, etc. Shawn says happiness is not a mood, it's a work ethic. And we need to keep in mind that it's not reality that shapes us, it's the lens your brain views the world through that shapes your reality. If we can change the lens, not only can we change your happiness, but every single educational and business outcome at the same time. Because external factors only make up about 10% of the predictors of long-term happiness. 90% is your outcome. In studies of on-the-job successes, 25% of success was related to IQ, 75% had to do with social supports, optimism levels, and the ability to see stress as a challenge as opposed to a threat. So this is, again, I just think it's such exciting and empowering information to realize that we can rewire our brains. We can rewrite the script and change the lens, regardless of where you're starting from. So just to kind of give you the Cliff's Notes version of the book, because I think this is such an awesome message. And these are actually things that I've been working on after rereading the book again. And I feel like it's had a positive outcome for me. So number one thing that you can do is practice gratitude. So every day, write down 3 specific things that you're grateful for. Doing that keeps you scanning throughout the day for the things that you're going to be grateful for, and kind of resets your focus. The next thing is journaling. Writing down a positive experience from the past 24 hours allows our brain to re-experience the happiness of those moments. And if you're not a journaling person, maybe find yourself an accountability buddy and ask to share daily. If you have a spouse or a best friend, maybe, set aside a time every day where you ask them what their favorite moment of the day was. The next one is meditating. Setting aside to meditate allows us to break with the cultural ADHD that constant multitasking gives us. And research has shown that monks who dedicate time to meditating actually have enlarged their left prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain most responsible for feeling happy. Exercising, I think we all know this. It's just hard to get yourself to do it. But even if it's just for 20 minutes, getting our heart rate up will help us connect with the consequences of our actions. So really making physical that you can change things. And the fifth thing is committing to conscious acts of kindness. So passing along a message to someone in our life builds our social supports. So think about it. When's the last time you wrote a thank you note or left somebody you care about a voicemail? Like, it's only going to build and create positive ripples around you if you're willing to pass along your gratitude. So those 5 things are pretty awesome. Like I said, I've been trying them. I think it's worth giving it a shot and see if it has a positive impact on your life. Another book that I really recommend. Next one. And this is a fun one. So this is kind of the total flip side of the nonfiction first 2 that I read. This one is called Vampire Winter by Lois Tilton. Goodreads gives it a 3.93 at the time of this recording. And what can I say? Vampires in the apocalypse. How could you go wrong? How much do we love that solid 1990s cover that you're looking at? Very much indeed, if you're me. Once I established that the author was not a total bigot and was trying to establish geography and time period specific bigotry, I was able to relax and enjoy this book more. I like that the vampire was not an angsty, bedazzled vampire. He was slight and scarred and basically enjoyed subsisting on humans. During the course of the book, he forms some alliances, but is primarily self-motivated, which makes sense in terms of a vampire for me. I like the scene that he was forced to struggle for survival in this post-apocalyptic world and had to deal with a contaminated food supply like the other survivors. I thought the book was a really clever premise, interesting character development, and my kind of favorite aspect of this is that they didn't try to make a vampire into a human being. Even though he softened somewhat through it, it was clear that he was a vampire the whole time. So that was a really fun book. I enjoyed it. Next one I read is another sort of in the vampire apocalyptic, post-apocalyptic world or genre that I like. And it was Apocalypse of the Dead, which is the second book in the Dead World series. Joe McKinney is the author. Goodreads gave it a 4.03. I did not read Dead World #1, but in my humble opinion, I don't know that you needed to. But I wouldn't mind doubling back and hitting that, assuming it establishes the outbreak in the world that Joe McKinney was talking about, the Dead World. The book started out pretty strong. I was interested in the forces who were attempting to contain the hot zone of zombies, though curious if government was still in place, why more resources were not allocated to containment or just burning the whole area out. It was interesting watching one of the main characters, Michael Barnes, for a while. But honestly, the book got a little dicey for me. Once everyone made it to the cult camp, the man fell for the dogma and suspended his views in favor of some dude's charisma. Also, dear zombie authors, stop with your dumb romances. Am I alone in this? I don't care about this love in these scenarios when I feel like everybody would just be stuck on survival. I'd prefer just to have everyone stick to the apocalypsing, please. Thank you. Another thing I didn't love was sort of in a lot of cult tropes, always got to have somebody who wants to do's it with everyone. Ugh, it's grody. And Another thing I sort of took issue with was, where does everyone get all these guns and munitions? It just seems suspect to me. It's like someone's idea of every other house has just got a stockpile of weapons and ammunition that, is surviving despite whatever conditions. It seems weird. By the last 50 or so pages, I was sort of hoping everyone would get Jonestown. But knowing there's another book in this series, it wasn't too surprising that they did not. So, yeah, sorry if that's a rough spoiler, but I feel like by process of deduction, if you know this is a multi-series book and this is book 2, there's another coming afterwards. I hope I didn't spoil it too much for you by letting you know that at least some of the characters will survive. So I don't know that I'd give this one the ringing endorsement that Goodreads did. It wasn't a 4 for me. It was, I don't know, a high 2.9 maybe. I definitely don't think I would read it again. Like I said, I would double back and maybe read the first book in this series. I don't know if I would go for book 3 because they've kind of established the romance factor, which I'm not a big fan of. So, Next book was another nonfiction. And this one I did not have as strong positive a reaction to as some of the other ones that I read. This I read for another book club entry, and it's called D-Day Girls, The Spies Who Armed the Resistance, Sabotaged the Nazis, and Helped Win World War II. And it's by Sarah Rose. Goodreads gave it a 3.74. And I don't know that I would go that high with it. I guess maybe a 3. I think it had some interesting content. But I did have some problems with it. So I'll kind of break this out into the good and the bad. The good was I do really like history. And I thought the book colored in a lot of the detail that I was not aware of. Like that Charles de Gaulle was a bit of a schmuck. Didn't know that necessarily. So that was interesting. I also learned that sadly the British government had some anti-Semitic tendencies in its treatment of Jewish potential espionage candidates. And if the title didn't give it away, the basic premise of the book is it's focusing on several of the female espionage agents that the British government recruited to work in France. It had some very interesting segments about the women that it focused on, and I'm kind of curious about why they picked the specific women that they did. I don't know if it was... My understanding is a lot of materials, personal diaries, etc., have come to light recently, and I don't know if these were just kind of the most interesting characters or the ones that had the most detail available about them. But it was... it did show some bravery and commitment to the women who helped the cause. You did get sort of emotionally attached to these women. It was very sad in particular that some of them came so close to being liberated before the end of the war, and some did not quite make it. One particular character, Andre Burrell, did not make it, and she came very close. The story focused on her a lot, and kind of abruptly showed how she met her end. So that was sad, but it was interesting knowing more about her. Again, we're supposed to be on the good here. So it brought attention to the deeds of these women and the rampant inequality of their treatment both before, during, and after their service, which I think all of those are important factors. So I am glad that I know more about these women. However, the bad, I found the writing to be fairly uneven. It skipped around a lot, so it wasn't very organized. I also, for nonfiction, I felt that the author took some liberties that I don't necessarily appreciate. Like, especially since some of these people died, so it's not, and most of them probably would have been passed at this point anyway, but stuff where I'm not entirely sure where the sources were, especially where there was dialogue where I'm like, I feel like I think that was something that the author put together, supposition, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So I feel not super great about that. The book was pretty much told you what to think about all these people, and sometimes not in the most glowing terms. It felt like a very long read, even though it was not. It had a lengthy sort of bibliography section and citations and appendix and whatever in the back, but it also leaped around from character to character. All of the characters had multiple names and were referred to by different ones at different times, which was confusing as well. For a book that's supposed to be drawing attention to the merit of these women and talks towards the end, especially about the inequality of their treatment based on gender, I find the use of the word girls upsetting in the title. D-Day girls. None of these were really girls. Like, they were all women, not little girls. So I didn't like that very much. So that was part of it. The use of girls. I also don't. The title focused on D-Day, but the book's treatment of D-Day was fairly anticlimactic. D-Day is particularly poignant to me. My grandfather, W. Verrill Hess, served in the Army during World War II, and he was present at the storming of Utah Beach. So the sacrifice there, I just felt like it was sort of like building towards D-Day and then just kind of rushed past D-Day. So that was strange as well. So those overall were kind of my concerns with the book. Again, not necessarily one that I would recommend. Definitely not one I don't think I would read again myself. But not with it totally without merit. So if you want to brush up, there might be some other ones that are better to look into, but that's the one I read. Those are the 5 books that I read for November of 2019.